Hello everyone. In this video lecture, I am going to speak on fiscal deficit. Typically, the fiscal deficit meaning can be described as the situation wherein a government's total expenditure exceeds its total receipts minus the borrowings within a financial year. It serves as a measure of the amount of money that the government needs to borrow to meet its expenses, especially at a time when its resources are insufficient. Therefore, I have written on the screen the formula of fiscal deficit as fiscal deficit is equal to total expenditure minus total receipts excluding borrowings. In one sentence or in one word, we cannot say that fiscal deficit is good or bad, because depending on the situation and depending on the use, the fiscal deficit can be proved to be beneficial for an economy if it leads to creation of new capital assets and sustainable sources of revenue. Contrarily, it may have an unfavorable impact on the economy if it is used only to tide over the revenue deficit. I would also like to tell you one thing, that an economy can go through fiscal deficit even when there is even if there is no revenue deficit. When the revenue budget is well balanced, there is a deficit in the capital budget, it leads to fiscal deficit. Similarly, a fiscal deficit can occur when there is an excess of revenue budget, but it is still less than the capital deficit or capital budget deficit. Like revenue deficit, fiscal deficit has also several implications or significances. Let me briefly explain you those implications. On the PowerPoint slide, you can see that I have mentioned about 4 implications of fiscal deficit. They are causes inflation, then increase in foreign dependence, financial burden for future generation, and finally deficits multiply borrowings. So let me explain you briefly one by one. When the amount of fiscal deficit is very huge or large, government of a country usually resorts to printing more currency by their central bank or monetary authority. That is a very dangerous practice or situation, although it is convenient to print new currency and fill up the gap. Why this is dangerous? Because printing of new currency means injecting new money in the circulation, and as a result, what happens? There may be a sharp increase in the price level, or this can lead to inflationary situation. It is often stated that fiscal deficit measures are an addition to the liabilities of the government. The larger the fiscal deficit, the greater the borrowings. Consequently, it creates a heavy burden of interest payments to the rest of the world if the loan is taken from the foreign countries or foreign nationals. And if the government borrows from foreign countries or foreign banks or foreign nationals, it can raise its dependence on other countries and hamper the political and economic sovereignty. As I have already said that to fill up the gap or the fiscal deficit, the government has to borrow, and borrowings increase the financial burden for the future generation. It adversely affects the future growth and development prospects of a country. Fiscal deficit indicates the total borrowing requirements of the government. Borrowings not only involve repayment of principal amount, but also requires payment of interest. Interest payments increase the revenue expenditure, which leads to revenue deficit. It creates a vicious circle of fiscal deficit and revenue deficit, wherein government takes more loans to repay the earlier loans, and as a result a country is caught in a debt trap. Okay, and once a country is caught in a debt trap, it becomes very difficult for that particular country or economy to get out of it. The current slide shows the difference between fiscal deficit and revenue deficit. Revenue deficit I have already discussed in the previous video lecture. So today I have discussed fiscal deficit. To compare, I have used this table. You can say, first of all, on the basis of meaning, we can distinguish between these two deficits. Fiscal deficit shows the excess of total expenditure over total receipts, excluding borrowings. On the other hand, revenue deficit shows the excess of revenue expenditure over the revenue receipts. Okay, and secondly, on the basis of indicator, we can distinguish fiscal deficit mainly measures total borrowing requirements of the government, whereas the revenue deficit indicates inability of the government to meet its regular and recurring expenditure. With this, we came to the end of this class. If you have any question, please post to me. Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a good time.